Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and basically this video we're going to shift away from using what's called plain vanilla JavaScript, which just means normal run-of-the-mill JavaScript, to manipulate the DOM and switch over to Jquery. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to head over to, I'll open up a separate tab, code.jquery.com. Here we can grab the latest version of Jquery, which is version 3.51. I'm going to grab the uncompressed script tag. So when you click on that, just click here to copy it, head over to HTML, and we're going to copy that script tag right above our app script tag because you want Jquery to load before our code loads. Okay, and that now allows us to use Jquery. Okay, so I'm going to just clear everything out. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the form for now. And just show you that we can do kind of all the same things. Like a lot of the things that were added to JavaScript, a lot of things that we used over the last several videos were actually things that weren't originally in JavaScript, that were actually inspired very much by the way Jquery works. So Jquery was really innovative. Still probably one of the most if not the most popular JavaScript library of all time. It's a fairly useful thing to know. It's not quite with things like React, Angular, and Vue that do a lot of abstraction over the front end code. A lot of this maybe not is used quite as much, but it's still useful to know because there's sometimes where you just don't need React, Angular, Vue. You're just building something simple, and these being able to sprinkle in a little bit of DOM manipulation using plain vanilla JS or Jquery does the job. But with Jquery, what I can do is I can grab elements just like before. But before, instead of basically, let's say I want to grab the body. Instead of using query selector, I just use a $sign. The $sign is a function. It's called the Jquery function. So I just use that, and then once again I can pass a CSS selector to select an element. So I can say, hey, I want to select the body. And just to make sure that I have it, again, we always want to console.log our variables. And see, Jquery wraps it in these nice Jquery object wrappers. So it's not a normal DOM node like with plain vanilla. It's actually a different type of object. It's a custom object that Jquery made. But there's the body, and I can manipulate it. So that's all good. So I can select, very similar, but see, that's a lot less typing than before. I'm not typing document.querySelector, I'm just typing a $sign. That's pretty nice. Okay, const. Let's create a new element. Let's create an h1 to put into the body. In this case, to create an element, do I do anything different? Nope, I still just use the $sign. Except now I use angle brackets. The angle brackets mean that I'm creating a new element. So this means a new h1. So a new h1 is created and saved in the h1. And just to double check, I do const h1, or no, console log. Okay, and then I can see, hey, look, there's an h1 in there. Good, wonderful. Now I want to edit the text. Now, since these are Jquery objects, I have to use Jquery functions to do the manipulation. So to manipulate the text, there's a function called text that if I leave it blank, will return me the text of the h1. But if I pass a string to it, will replace the text of the h1. So this is an h1. Okay, so now that h1 has text, but again, we don't see it yet because I haven't appended it to the DOM. So I would just choose the body because we saved that in a variable. Again, just use append, so very similar to before. And I'm going to append the h1, and it works. But see, this looks like a lot less typing than we did before. Okay. So we've now been able to query the DOM like we do with query selector, but with a lot less typing. We're able to create elements like we did with document.createElement, but a lot less typing. Okay, and we can append just like we did before. The general idea of how things work doesn't change. The syntax is a little bit different, and the modifications are done usually by functions instead of assigning values to the properties like we did before, where we were using the equal sign a lot. Okay, so if I want to style, I have a couple different options. I can change the CSS of an h1 individually. This is like using the style object, except what I do is I pass in, it's a function, and first I say, hey, what do I want to change? We'll say the color. And then the second argument is what I want to change it to, red. And see, that changes it to red. I could add a class to it, so I could do h1.add class, or actually h1. I'm pretty sure it's add class. Add class, and then again, what do we call the class? Cheese. So I'm gonna comment out this line. Add class cheese, and see that changes it. That adds the class, which modifies it. So again, nothing all that super different. And now if I want to add an event, so let's say, hey, I want to say h1 dot, instead of add event listener, I just type in on. So h1 dot on click, and then I pass in my function. So almost the same thing, except instead of add event listener, it's on. You know, the whole point of jQuery is just to make it less typing, a little bit less painful to write DOM code. And I just write the same thing, like I'll write an event, and we'll just say that, hey, whenever you click on the h1, we're going to alert clicked. So then I click. Okay, so see, pretty straightforward. Like you saw, like pretty much we just went over everything we've done in the last 5 videos, not in only a few minutes, because jQuery just basically does the same thing more straightforward. And the jQuery documentation is actually written really well. And the cool thing is that, like, let's say I have all those before we had query selector all to select multiple things. So let's say I had a bunch of H1s, cheese, and I'll just copy all these H1s. Okay, with the query selector, in jQuery, the selector doesn't just select one. It can select one, or it can select many. So if I say const h1 list equals $h1, and then I console.log the h1 list, let's say I get an array of h1s. Okay. Now the only thing you have to keep in mind is that, again, it's a jQuery object, so you have to access it in a sort of jQuery way. So if I want to modify the first one, I would say h1 list dot eq. So you don't do this. You would have, I mean, you don't do this to access the thing in the array. What you have to do is you have to do dot eq 0, and that'll grab the first item from the list. So it's kind of like the item function as we saw earlier, where you can grab different items from a node list. And yeah, h1.list, that'll give me the first one, so I can make the first one, we'll say the text of the first one, we'll change that to cheese 2, and you can see that one changed to cheese 2. Okay, so that's jQuery in a nutshell. It just makes things a little bit easier. It's just a little bit cleaner. And it has some other really nice built-in functions like Ajax. Although, again, nowadays you have fetch built into the browser, so that makes life... again, a lot of things that really were killer about what jQuery provided, which is why it was so popular, have since been kind of added into JavaScript proper. But still, jQuery is a little bit less verbose, a little bit kind of still nicer API. But, you know, it was really disruptive, really innovative at the time, especially back in those days where browser compatibility, like how DOM manipulation occurred in different browsers, was very different. So having sort of one API that's compatible with all browsers and that just kind of worked was pretty nice. But with that kind of ends this DOM masterclass. Well, actually, one more video. We still got to cover web components. So I'll see you all in the next video to discuss web components, and then we're done. Cool. So I'll see you all in the next video.